Hello, I am Parnell Thill from Barko Forestry Products. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Round the Stump with Barko, the podcast that knows wood is good and loggers are great.
Scott, we have a list of questions and a list of topics that we want to get to. But before we do that, to kind of set the stage, I would love it if you would just kind of introduce yourself.
Thank you, Parnell. It's an honor and a privilege to kick off the inaugural episode of Round the Stump with Barko. I appreciate the invitation to come over here to Superior and join you for this episode. And a little bit about myself. I've been involved in the timber industry for 20 years now. Prior to my current position as Executive Director of the American Loggers Council, which is a national organization representing 42 states across the country, I was the Executive Director of the Associated Contract Loggers and Truckers of Minnesota for 17 years. So there's my resume when it comes to timber. But the irony is, as we're sitting here at Barko's headquarters in Superior, Wisconsin, on Lake Superior, the irony is that I spent the first 15 years of my career as a merchant marine officer and trained on the Great Lakes iron ore boats here. So it's quite an interesting transition from a merchant marine engineering officer to a national executive director of the timber industry. Some loggers approached me 20 years ago in Minnesota and asked if I'd be interested in forming an organization there and being their executive director. And I confessed. I said, guys, I'm not a logger. And they said, we don't need you to log. We know how to do that part. But we need you to organize our association and represent us. So we took a run at that. So let's give it a year, see how it goes. And that lasted 17 years before I had the opportunity to take the position at the American Loggers Council as well. That's about a little bit about me and my background. And the American Loggers Council, like I said, represents loggers in 42 states. And we've been involved with Barko for quite a while. In fact, about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we held one of our summer board of directors meetings right here in Superior at Barko. And we had our board members from around the country come to Barko, and you guys hosted us. So we appreciate that. It's good to be back.
Well, thanks for being back, and we look forward to doing that again in the future. A lot of the people listening to this will think they know what the American Loggers Council does. Others will admittedly have zero idea, and everything in between. I'm wondering if you would be good enough to at least just say, hey, here's what the general, even if we're not speaking verbatim from a mission statement, in your own words, what is the mission and the vision of the American Loggers Council in 2024?
Well, the mission of the American Loggers Council is to provide a voice for the independent loggers across the country. And how we do that is our membership primarily consists of state associations. As we're in Wisconsin right here, you've got the Great Lakes Timber Professionals Association, which represents Wisconsin and Michigan. Right across the bridge, you've got the Associated Contract Loggers and Truckers of Minnesota. And there are state associations across the country that are timber states. All of those state associations are members of the American Loggers Council. So we serve as an umbrella national association representing the state members, as well as associate members like Barko and others that are involved in the industry. But primarily, we provide a voice to loggers at the national level in Washington, D.C., where we have an office as well that I work out of.
So how that drills down, siphons down into the lives of actual, logging professionals who spend their days in the woods. Most of the loggers that I've dealt with in my role here as marketing director here, they're pretty confident about knowing what they do for a living. They know what they do. One of the frustrations that comes up, and again, I'm relatively new to this industry, but I'm growing up all my life. One of the narratives is that, hey, these logging people, they're the guys chopping down all the trees and making the world a worse place. What's going on? These loggers must be, we got to paint those guys with with an evil brush. And I think some of that narrative is slowly ebbing away, but there still seems to be, at least from my perspective, there still seems to be work to be done along those lines. I'm kind of convincing the world that, hey, loggers want to take care of the forest because that's their bread and butter. There's nobody taking better care of the forest than the people who want to make a living utilizing it. And you have a campaign. The American Loggers Council has a campaign kind of cruising throughout the year that is kind of aimed at righting that reputational ship. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're correct, Parnell. The image, we've let somebody else paint the image of the American logger in the United States, and that's unfortunate. So we have undertaken a public image and workforce development campaign, a $250,000 campaign to start changing that narrative, to correcting that narrative. And you're right, loggers are the only resource that private and public land management organizations have to manage their forests. And that's critical. Managing the forest is extremely critical. I was just in Yosemite last week, and they had wildfires in California go through Yosemite and destroy thousands upon thousands of acres. And there was burned timber on the ground. And you know who was in there cleaning that up? Loggers. Loggers were in there cleaning up the burned timber in Yosemite National Park to improve it and to manage it. So we are working hard on explaining to the general public their dependence upon products that come out of the forest, because there's a big disconnect between the public perception of the origin of forest-based products and the reality of where they come from. As an example, I joke that 2x4s are not born in Home Depot. That way, they come out as raw timber, go to a sawmill, which processes it and then ships it to the stores and stuff, the lumber yards and stuff. And there are 5,000 products that can be tied back or traced back to forest-based. So society could not exist without forest-based products. In fact, the third video we're doing right now is A World Without Wood, to show the public what products they use every day, and they're probably not even conscious of the fact that they're coming out of the forest. And without the loggers to sustainably manage the forest, and that's the key thing right now, logging today is not logging of 100 years ago, period. We practice sustainable forest management practices that are third-party audited to make sure that this resource is renewable and for future generations to enjoy as well.
Very articulate explanation of the relationship there and the evolving nature of it between the logging community and the general public at large. How do you know if you're succeeding? How do you take measure of whether or not that reputational evolution is taking place?
No, I know. Yeah, what's the metrics to measure the impact of the effort of investing $250,000 into changing it? And I am encouraged. As I work in D.C., our office is right across the street from the White House, so we're in the heart of D.C., and we are beginning to influence public policy at the national level. The general public is coming around as well when they're experiencing the consequences of unmanaged forests, particularly in the western states, with the wildfires and the loss of property and life and everything out there. They're realizing that it's necessary to manage a forest for the benefit of the general public as a whole. So we think we're making a difference out there. We've been having discussions with public policymakers in Washington, D.C., and they're inviting us to the table. And so I guess that's one of the measures I would use. There was a time 10 years ago when we could knock on the doors and we weren't welcome, but we are welcome today.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I think is another kind of manifestation of that relational evolution, it does seem like there is something of a softening of the rhetoric between the various factions of people that all care about the woods, and we all do. If you're a human being, you better care about the woods. And so it seems like the people who were in generations past, decades past, who would generally be butting heads are starting to say, hey, listen, not unlike how the federal government changed its security apparatus after 9/11. So make sure all these general agencies are talking to each other. Similarly here, it seems like people are recognizing that this problem is bigger than any one given agency. We got to come together on this and figure out how to not only extinguish wildfire, but to prevent it in the first place, and to manage the forests in an ongoing way so that the threat is mitigated on the front end. One of the ways I think that that relationship between the general public and the logging community writ large, one of the sort of the proof is in the pudding sort of things, is the way that everybody who cares, everybody who has a stake in the game relative to the health of our forests, which is every human being, people are starting to kind of work together at the edges and at the fringes, whereas before certain organizations used to butt heads. The president of the ALC, Mike Albrecht, recently had an article that made kind of this point, having to do with that coming together, that coalescence that has heretofore been kind of non-existent. Would you care to comment on that and shore up Mr. Albrecht's argument?
It's an important transition on both sides, and I'll be the first to admit it as well, from our sector, our side of the aisle, if you will, that we come together and find common ground. And, we've been in our corner, and the others have been in their corner for a long time, and we've really not accomplished anything. The health of the forest has deteriorated, as an example. The health of the logging industry has deteriorated along with that, unfortunately. But it reminds me when I was in Colorado quite a while back, and they had allowed the lodgepole pine beetle killing the timber there. And they asked Minnesota loggers to come out there and look at harvesting that timber, because they realized that they had run off all their logging industry in Colorado 20 years ago, for that matter. So they didn't have the resources anymore to address the threats. Now that's changing and turning around. In fact, the American Loggers Council just signed a historic memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Forest Service last month in Washington, D.C., that formalizes a cooperative agreement that we should work together where we have common ground. That's historic. So people are realizing that what's been done in a lot of the national forests has resulted in unhealthy forests. And they're also realizing that it's impacted the timber sector, and we've lost a lot of the industry. We lose 2% of the industry per year over the last 20 years, as an example. And that's documented. And there's various factors. But bottom line is the Forest Service, the DNRs of the state associations, the private forest managers have woken up and realized that if they don't have the logging resources to manage their forests, they cannot manage them. The Forest Service doesn't manage their forests. In fact, here's an example. I was at a meeting in Minnesota with the governor and the DNR state forester, and the state forester said to the governor, he said, Governor, the DNR in Minnesota does not manage the forests. The loggers manage it for us.
And you think that relationship that you described there in Minnesota has echoes in other states in the union?
There's no question in my mind about that. The logging sector really answers a lot of the challenges. As an example, there's a significant move on right now to recognize forest-based biomass for power generation, renewable electricity, for sustainable aviation fuel development. A lot of these things are all going to come from biomass, and a lot of that forest-based biomass.
Back in the mid-90s, the people who sell meat for a living, people didn't understand, in the same way that people presently, as you discussed, don't exactly know where their toilet paper comes from, or don't exactly know where their paper bags come from, or the building materials that go into their house or whatever else. In generations past, people really didn't know where their chicken breasts came from, until people started saying, hey, listen, these are from actual animals, that actual the animals that live and breathe and need to be taken care of, and so on. And I think the heightened awareness of that, the consciousness of that, has led to a much more enlightened consumerate. So when people who are consuming those products, they have a better handle on what they are doing and their role in it. In the same way, if people get smarter and smarter and more cognizant about where these products are coming from, that are coming from the forest, is the whole goal there to make sure that the American consumer, we'll talk about America, U.S. for now, that the general consumerate in the U.S. is similarly cognizant of, hey, this thing that I'm using comes from the forest, and I didn't know that before. Is that kind of the idea?
That's the model that we're following. You mentioned the butchers or the processing facilities on meat side, but it was the same thing for farmers, ranchers, farmers, whatever it might be. In the 70s and 80s, they were very much maligned and had a very negative reputation. We looked at what they were, who they were, and how they overcame that. And we're modeling our campaign as well. As an example, we're highlighting the fact that the logging industry, the businesses, are not large corporations that are consuming the timber. They're small, family-owned, multi-generational businesses. Every one of them is across the country. And so when we can change that image from a big land consumer, like whatever mill it is, corporate mill it is, that the loggers are all family-owned, multi-generational father and sons out there making a living, then I think we can kind of put ourselves into the same context of the farmer that's out there. And the other biggest thing that we're doing, though, is we have attempted over years to say, yes, but these are the scientific reasons for that it's good to manage the forest. The general public that does not resonate with the general public. They don't care about the facts. They don't care about silvicultural science and everything else. They've been conditioned based on emotional arguments against our industry that, once a tree is gone, it's gone forever. They don't understand that it's all renewable and they all are replanted or grow back naturally and stuff. So we are approaching it from an emotional perspective as well. And it's really resonating, and I think it's going to start to move that needle within the public opinion.
One of the first times we met, you described what seemed to me this sort of surrealistic craziness in terms of regulation and having to do with the intersection of the logging arena, the logging world, and the DOT. How you can drive some places with a loaded truck, but you can't drive other places, which ends up steering or diverting some of these loaded trucks onto roads that you would think would be less suitable for that. Could you just explain a little bit for our listeners what exactly that whole conundrum is about?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. It's one of the number one priorities of the American Loggers Council. As we looked at doing more with less, we have to become more efficient. And the transportation policy, particularly the federal transportation policy regarding the interstates, is a hodgepodge mess across the country. I was thinking about this and looking forward to coming down here and participating. And I was over in Michigan a couple months ago where, they can run large trucks, the largest in the country. As an example, Michigan logging trucks can carry twice the weight of southern United States logging trucks. Twice the weight, 80,000 pounds compared to 160,000 pounds. And now the configurations are a little different axle-wise and that type of thing, but regardless, they're able to do that. So in Wisconsin, for the most part, in Minnesota, in the Great Lakes and the Lake States region, and as well as most of the country, there are higher weights allowed because they are suitable on county and state roadways and local roadway systems. But those higher weights are not permitted on the federal interstate system. Yeah, yes, exactly. Which are usually more direct routes, safer routes, and less congested routes. And actually, the road system is built to a higher standard than the county roads are that we're using right now. Back about 2012, logging trucks in Minnesota, right across the bridge from where you're at in Superior, had to go down a cobblestone road, main road in Duluth through the business district there, while there was an interstate running parallel to that. So, to bring attention to this issue, we ran a 75 vehicle logging convoy down through the center of Duluth on cobblestone roads to draw attention to this. Fortunately, as a result of that, with Congressman Rick Nolan, we were able to get a 26-mile corridor to go around Duluth finally and use the interstate with the same weights that we're already running. But that's a 26-mile limited corridor. Mississippi in March did get federal legislation through that allows them to run 88,000 pounds, which they normally could only run 80,000 pounds on the interstate, but they could run 88,000 pounds on their county and state roads throughout the whole state of Mississippi. It's safer. It's better for the environment. You have less truck trips. You have less emissions. You have increased fuel efficiency. There's no reason not to do it. And it's also done throughout New England. So there's precedent out there. We're chipping away. We're whittling away. Whittling away is probably a better term for timber talk. We're whittling away at that issue, and we're making progress on it. But it would be one of the simplest things that would increase efficiency, improve safety on the roads, and also contribute to reducing CO2 emissions as well. So it's a win-win-win all the way around.
Yeah, that's a really excellent anecdote and a great example of, all the great ideas seem super logical. It's just you got to fight through a bunch of bureaucracy to get it done. So it's nice that there's organizations like the ALC whose mission it is to try to navigate that bureaucracy. That's an excellent example of the work that the organization does. If you were actively recruiting, so to speak, people to try to join the American Loggers Council, what's in it for them? Why do loggers like to belong?
Well, first of all, we always tell people that our membership is primarily made up of state associations. We as an organization do not want to compete with our state associations for membership. In fact, if you're a member of the Great Lakes Timber Producers Association, Professional Association, excuse me, they have a different one for their P. Everybody else is producers, they're professionals. But if you're a member of the GLTPA, you're automatically a member of the American Loggers Council. So unless you're in a state that doesn't have a state association, we discourage people from joining directly to the American Loggers Council as an independent logger. Join your state association. They're doing the work on the ground for you at the state level. They need your support. They support us from their organization, and we do the work on the national level. So you'll be able to benefit from being a member of your local association through some of the programs that the American Loggers Council has, and being a member of the American Loggers Council as well. One of the things we do is we offer truck rebates through the American Loggers Council. So if you're a logger who's a member of your state association, who's a member of the American Loggers Council, and you want to buy an international truck, then you're eligible for up to a $4,000 rebate on that purchase. So there's a monetary value, but most importantly, people say, well, what do I get for my $350 to join a state association? Well, first of all, that's only half the cost of filling up your diesel tanks on your truck that day. So when you look at the value, it's really nothing. You can't pinch a penny and lose a dollar because it's a good investment to be a member. But mostly you get people that are speaking on your behalf at the state legislature, at the state capitals, at the Washington, D.C., the national capital, and really working on your behalf. Where else can you hire somebody to do all that for $350 a year?
For people, if they want to be more involved, Can you describe the couple of meetings that you guys have on an annual basis, and what the role of members is in those meetings?
Everybody who's a member of the American Loggers Council, whether it be directly or through their state association, is always invited to participate in all of our meetings. We hold three major meetings a year. We'll be having a summer board of directors meeting in Butte, Montana next month, and loggers from around the country will fly in for that meeting. That's a business meeting primarily. You'll be there, and we're looking forward to having you join us there. And then we have our annual meeting. I just got back from Sonora, California on Saturday, and we were out there signing the contract. We move the annual meeting every year to the home state of the current president. And since Mike Albrecht is from California, this year it'll be in California, Sonora. That's a 3-day conference, a lot of activities and stuff. And then we have a DC fly-in once a year, whether it be March or April, depending on the congressional schedule and calendar, where we have over 100 congressional meetings with people. But what I want to get to is the most important thing that we can do, or that members can do, is attend these events, because we represent them. It's their organization. And when they are there and they're speaking, it carries a lot of weight, particularly in DC. I love working for the American Loggers Council and the loggers we represent. Just before I was walking in your door today, I got a call from Alabama, a logger down there saying, "Hey, you guys are doing a great job. We've been reading your articles and stuff. Thank you very much. We appreciate it." But the point is, we only know what our members tell us. But if a member shows up in Washington, D.C. and sits down with a congressman, when we were in Washington, D.C. in April, we were meeting directly with the Speaker of the House in his reception room. And so, but it's more important for loggers to talk to these people than it is for me, to be honest with you, because the loggers are the constituents for these people and stuff. So those are the three meetings that we have a year.
Appreciate it. We're coming up on our allotted time here. I'm wondering if there's a couple of things in your head, and they don't have to be, that in parting you would like loggers to know about the American Loggers Council that you haven't already said. Is there anything that you're hoping to get out, or did you cover everything, do you think?
Well, the American Loggers Council was formed by loggers 30 years ago, exactly this, it was 1994, to bring a voice to loggers, as I said earlier. And the reason being is there were things that were being done that were being dictated to the logging sector from other sectors within the forest products industry, and there was no consultation for the American loggers with the American Loggers Council or the loggers themselves. So the organization has grown tremendously. We are the leading organization in the United States, the only organization that represents loggers exclusively. And as a result of that, we've grown in the last 12 months from 38 to 42 states being represented. When I was in California last week, we received notice that another organization is joining the American Loggers Council. So we represent loggers from Alaska now to Florida and Maine to California and everything in between. So we're their organization. We're here to work for the loggers to improve the conditions, the policies, the legislations, the regulations, because loggers like to go in the woods and harvest timber. But if you're not in the Capitol, you're not in Washington, D.C., things can happen there that cost you money as a logger.
Fair enough. I did want to bring up one more thing. I just looking at my notes that I didn't get quite as deep as I wanted to. And that is, and we touched on it, that is the dynamic of wildfire mitigation. One of the things that I read recently, and again, you can correct me if I've got this twisted, but just due to the increase in the volume and the intensity of wildfires over the past decade or whatever it's been, that there are loggers out there who have spent their life, harvesting wood for the timber market, and who are now finding work doing either, like I said earlier, either disaster prevention or mitigation or pre-planning or pre-fire management. Do you have any insight at all as to how big of a factor the wildfire element is to loggers in 2024-25?
The wildfire situation has really brought the health and the need of forest management to the forefront. Until the forest started burning and destroying towns, people didn't connect it. It's really simple. It's basic fire science. It takes oxygen, an ignition source, and fuel. You can't remove the oxygen. You can't, necessarily remove the ignition source if it's lightning strikes, but you can remove or reduce the fuel loads, and that's important because where typically rule of thumb was you had 75 stems per acre, or trees per acre for a healthy forest. You're looking at 350 or more stems per acre right now. So the density of the forest is out of control. And so one lightning strike really magnifies the impact of wildfires and stuff. The American Loggers Council just completed a $5 million cooperative agreement with the U.S. Forest Service to remove hazardous fuels off of the landscape in California and in Oregon, for that matter. And so that was a demonstration that if loggers can access the timber and have markets for utilization, for the most part, it went to biomass power plants, then we can reduce that fuel load. And so loggers definitely, they're the tool on one hand to manage the forest and reduce the density to make it healthier. And when a wildfire does go through, it won't be as intense. Loggers are also the ones removing those hazardous fuels to alleviate or mitigate, as you said, the wildfire threat to communities and forests. And then they're also the ones going in post wildfire and cleaning up and salvaging the timber and replanting the forest and stuff. We're in Wisconsin right now speaking, but just across the bridge in Minnesota in 2007, up in the Boundary Waters canoe area, the wilderness area, they had the Ham Lake fire. It burned 100 structures or whatever it was. 100,000 acres were burned. I was on that fire on a strike team from the Iron Range of Minnesota. The interesting thing was you had a lot of loggers on that fire with their equipment doing dozer lines and that type of stuff and accessing areas and fighting the fires as well. So it's interesting to know that not only do loggers manage the forest and keep them healthy, but they also respond to protect the forest during wildfire and then to salvage the forest and replant the forest post wildfire.
Excellent. Well, Scott, I really appreciate spending some time with us this morning. It's been a real privilege to have you on. Your organization that you represent lend credibility to this podcast and to our organization as well. And we're proud and happy members of the ALC and look forward to continuing that relationship. And for the listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. Tune in next time when we do this again with another guest.
Parnell, I'd like to also thank Barko for doing this podcast because you're helping us promote the industry as well and educate people. Thank you.